Hey, hello everybody, and welcome to your Ruby Live event. My name is Eric Wynkoop, and I'm one of your instructors in the courses. And today is my office hours, and I want to, in particular, welcome you to submit any questions regarding food and cooking, and I'll do my best to answer those with a meaningful response for you to get you back in the kitchen. And, we're going to get started here in just a moment here, but I want to take care of a couple of housekeeping items. And the number one item is if you would like to participate a little bit more directly, you're welcome to by submitting a question or a comment in the dialog box that's on the upper right hand corner of your screen. Number two, you'll see some questions that have already been populated on the right hand side of your screen. And if you would like to have me respond to any of those sooner than later, click on that heart-shaped icon, and that'll bump it up in priority. Okay, and let's get started. Before I jump into the questions, I do want to address a question that's come up a few times in the last, say, 10 days, maybe 2 weeks or so, and that's regarding substitutions generally in recipes. And, when it comes to cooking in general, I really want to encourage you to exercise your curiosity and to go in and try things out. Make a substitution from white quinoa to red quinoa or whatever it happens to be and just give it a try. Maybe something calls for oregano, but you don't have any. You've got some thyme instead. Try the thyme. The taste will be different. Sometimes the textures are affected, the color is different, the aroma will shift, and the end result will be a little bit different than what the author intended who wrote the original recipe that you might be referencing. But it'll probably be good. And if it's not as good as what you were hoping for, you have learned from that process. And the next time you approach this recipe and want to make a change here or there, you will be a little bit more informed and more confident in what you're doing. So, rather than asking those simple questions of, can I substitute thyme in place of oregano or red quinoa in place of white quinoa, just give it a try. And, there really is no failing, right? It's all experience that we're gaining. And just give it the old college try, as they say, and have some fun with the process. All right. And now I'm ready to jump into the questions. So let's take a look at the first one, which is from Kevin, who writes, I'm starting off as a home cook, and one thing I really struggle with is timing, especially when trying to cook dishes concurrently. Is there a template or methodology you use for planning out timing? So, a template or methodology per se is to number one, get some cooking under your belt. So you've got some experience that you can lean on, at least a little bit, right? You got to start with something and start to think about what item, right, or which dish is going to take the longest to prepare, longest to cook, and that might be an initial cooking phase, or it could be the whole process, including the finishing at the tail end of that preparation. But think about what takes longest and get started on that first. Okay. And then shorter processes can be started f- you know, uh, after that, as all these things then sort of point to this point of culmination at the end, right? Now, at the foundation of all of this is going to be mise en place. And I really cannot overemphasize the importance of mise en place. And, as home cooks go, oftentimes we certainly when we're starting out, we don't understand the concept. We don't appreciate how important that is to the flow of cooking. and the success of finishing a meal that has multiple components, or even one dish that's got different things going into it, successfully, from a timing perspective. Now, if you are coming from a restaurant kitchen background, uh, in terms of the actual cooking of a dish, so it could be as a line cook or even banquet cooking, or I shouldn't say even banquet cooking, but also banquet cooking, then you definitely will understand, even with the smallest of experience, how important mise en place is. A restaurant line cannot function, certainly not gracefully and coherently and successfully, without having everything in its place, so that when an order comes in, and oftentimes multiple orders, and in the case of banquet cookery, it could be hundreds, of orders in that particular party that you need to prepare or execute in a very short period of time. And the only way to do that is to have everything prepared in front of you. Okay. So, Kevin and others out there, I want you to go back to that fundamental building block of being disciplined to set up your mise en place, and then again think about what items are going to start longest, get those things going first, and then as things get closer to culmination, again whether it's that single dish or the meal time with multiple dishes coming together, you'll have the best opportunity for success. But all that still takes some practice, right? Simply having the mise en place in front of you isn't going to get you necessarily to a successful outcome. You need to practice using the mise en place with whatever it is that you're preparing, right? Or the style of food generally that you prepare, perhaps at home, right? In this case. And so that's my template, uh, with a focus on mise en place and my methodology, okay, in terms of practicing and then starting with the item that takes the longest and then moving toward completion. And again, let me just add one last thought. Mise en place should include everything. It should include your final seasonings as you do a check for salt and acidity. It should include your garnishes. That are going to be that final little touch on the plate or on the dish before it goes out. So all those things should be in reach. They should be organized in a place where you're not going to overlook them or forget them in some way. Okay. And have fun with that. And of course, practice makes better. Thank you. Next up is a question from Bill, who writes, I'm way behind in my cooking course. Do you have any ideas about how to incorporate the course cooking tasks into my daily cooking routine? Now, this is a fun question, and hopefully I can provide a straightforward and simple solution for Bill. And that is really to say, let's eat the food that you cook. But number one is to time those recipes with days or meal periods that make sense for you, right? So, in other words, if you're working on a dessert, maybe you're not preparing that in the late afternoon as you lead up to dinner time necessarily, or maybe that's not the best example. Maybe you're not doing that early in the morning at breakfast time. Maybe maybe it is something that's going to be a dessert after lunch or after dinner. Maybe it's going to be the following day when you have some family or friends over because you just prepared a lot of food. Um, so just think about the logistical timing that makes sense for your particular situation. Okay, again, whether it's the meal period in a day or whether it's the day of the week when you've got the people at the table to enjoy the food that you've prepared. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with preparing something today that you enjoy tomorrow. Okay. Leftovers are quite fine. Some dishes taste better, frankly. after some time has passed, as flavors have married and mingled, and rough edges have settled down. But admittedly, there are some things that taste best when they're served freshest. And maybe it's a saute of green beans with some sliced almonds and shallots. Not bad as a leftover, but arguably better when they're fresh out of the pan. So that you would want to plan for the meal period coming up, for example. So, Bill, give that a try. I think the solution is pretty simple, but it does take some forethought to get a plan into place so that it makes sense for your particular situation. Thank you. Next question is from Lee, who says, I'm curious about how you approach creating your own flavor combinations for plant-based bowls or soups when developing a personal flavor identity. Would you suggest starting with spices and herbs? Aha. So this idea of creating your own style, in this case, flavor identity, to use Lee's words, I think is a little more advanced technique, okay, or an advanced outcome of your cooking, which means that step number one or phase number one for any cook should be to get into the kitchen and to cook and to cook and to cook some more so that you start to understand these different components of flavor development. And part of it comes from the cooking methods that you use. For example, if you use a dry heat cooking method that imparts browning or caramelization, that's going to be one layer of flavor development. And then you can reach for things like citrus fruit or herbs or spices or alliums to bring in these different layers of flavoring and aroma, and those things in combination with whatever your main ingredients are create a certain outcome or certain output in style. Okay. So your own flavor identity or style of cooking is going to be a combination of culture and biology, I would say. So the culture is your experience of of food, generally speaking. So it's travel, it's where you grew up, it's whose food you're eating as a child, it's who you emulate as an adult. It's what sort of foods interest you in terms of maybe regional cuisines, combined with your personality and just your palate preferences. And so, somewhere in the intersection of all that complexity is going to emerge your flavor identity, right, or your style of cooking. And so, as you get down this path of gaining experience and confidence around using herbs and spices and all these other ingredients, then you're going to have that toolkit, so to speak, right? That know-how that is based upon your skill development and your experience, the knowledge up here to know what to reach for. And you might sit back and just simply reach toward things that are sort of inherently comfortable, familiar, or tasty to your palate. And then you can challenge that by also studying regional cuisines or studying maybe the style of cooking of a particular person. It could be your mother, or it could be a favorite chef that you see in the media, and start to bring in some of the characteristics of that person. Okay. But again, I see it as a longer term, a little bit more advanced phase of one's cooking journey through life. And so take your time. And in relation to your focus on spices and herbs, I would say definitely come to understand herbs and spices. Okay, so herbs can be dry herbs as well as fresh herbs, and spices are going to be, spices of all sorts that are then related to different regional cuisines around the world. And if you look at the repertoire of any cuisine, it will rely upon a finite, I mean, basically, a finite set of um, cooking methods and techniques, and then also ingredients. but all of that is put together in different ratios to create all these different flavor combinations, these different outputs or outcomes. And so as you start to understand better, like when to add herbs, whether to use whole herbs or ground herbs, how long to bloom them in oil, or subject them to heat at the initial step versus later on, you'll come to better understand how you want to use, right, those spices. So practice and be patient and enjoy the journey. Thank you so much. Next up from Lai, perhaps, or maybe it's Lee. The next question is bread dough the same as pizza dough? I want to make pizza. So the quick answer is yes. Of course, it would depend on what sort of bread we're talking about. But if you're talking about a lean dough, right, the one that doesn't have any fat added to it, or perhaps something just very in a very small amount, that definitely translates to pizza dough, and a very easy bridge there. Okay, so enjoy the process here. I think you're making pizza is a lot of fun, and uh, as you sort of fine tune this process to create your own style around pizza making, it's nothing but good eats. So I hope you enjoy this journey as well. Thank you. Hey, Shar, good day. So nice to see you. Shar says, what methods do you use for removing arrows from a pomegranate? Let me see. I haven't cracked open a pomegranate in a while. What is, what is my method here? I like this. Well, at least one method that comes to mind now is to sort of peel off the top a little bit, and peel off some of the, like a wide stripe of skin down to the bottom, so I can crack it open, and then kind of turn it inside out, and uh, start to knock those things out from the little clusters that they come in. And that's a method that I have used, and hopefully that makes sense. But the idea is to turn that thing up sort of inside out, and you can be gentle with them, right? Because those things will break open, and you'll lose a lot of juice. So be as gentle as you need to be as you pull uh, these arrows out from these little bunches, okay, inside the pomegranate. I hope that makes sense. I hope you can give that a try. Thank you. Next up is from Londari, who says, can I cook chicken and then freeze it for later use? And the answer is absolutely, yes. Chicken can be cooked, and it can be stored in the freezer with very good outcomes upon thawing. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind. When we cook chicken, number one, there's a common tendency to overcook chicken. And the chicken breast, which is lowest in fat, is going to be the least forgiving, as you end up pushing out a lot of the moisture content, which quickly results in a dry tissue, a dry meat. And so the challenge here is to cook the chicken. And I'm going to take two approaches here. If we're going to cook it all the way done, we want to cook it just at the edge of doneness, and use a thermometer. And you can typically cook it to a touch under 165 degrees Fahrenheit, and carryover cooking will nudge it up to 165, which is that usual benchmark of safe cooking for chicken and other things. Okay, generally, okay, but specifically there are other examples outside of this particular discussion. So this way, the chicken's all done. You can freeze it, and then upon thawing, you can go ahead and just eat it cold, or you can reheat it. Either way, and you're safe. Now, the other issue in this sequence here is that the freeze thaw cycle will expel some of the moisture in the chicken. And so that process alone also dries it out. So if you're overcooking it and then you're also freezing it and thawing it, you have the risk of this two-stage drying out, right, of the chicken. So keep that in mind, and uh, don't keep it in the freezer for an extended period of time. We're familiar with freezer burn, right, which is essentially the drying out of items in the freezer. So have a plan. First, label and date the item as it goes into the freezer. Have a plan to utilize it, ideally within, I'd say, a couple of months or so. And is it going to be good for longer than that? Sure, it is. There's not going to be any risk to your health if you keep it in there for 6 months or a couple of years, but the aesthetic will decline over time. So use it sooner than later. Now, the other approach here in the cooking of the chicken is to maybe cook it, say, 75 or 80% done, and then freeze it. Again, use it within a reasonably short period of time, but label it as being undercooked so that when you thaw it and utilize it, you know that you need to heat treat it, right? Or cook it further to finish. And this is a nice way to preserve moisture, okay, in the chicken because it wasn't overcooked to begin with. All right, so you can choose either of these paths, and the outcomes can be very, very good. You just need to be careful in the heat that you apply in method number one, and then be careful that you label the product and then finish cooking it with method number two. Okay, practice makes better, so I hope you give this a try. Thank you. Next up from Lai. Is there a difference when using instant yeast and active yeast when making dough? The big difference is that instant yeast is instantaneous in a way. It works faster in a more aggressive manner than active yeast. And the general difference is that instant yeast is it's in smaller granules, or the particles are smaller, so it has greater surface area, which allows you to add it directly to dry ingredients and start your mixing immediately. Okay, and then it'll do its work faster. Active yeast needs to be bloomed in warm water, and it's helpful to add a couple of pinches of sugar as food for the yeast to get it started. And then you add that to the other ingredients in the dough to get that mix. So there's a little extra time up front, number one, that's required when preparing active yeast. Number two, the activation of active yeast is a little bit slower than the instant yeast. So it'll usually require a little bit more time through the first and the first fermentation, and then that second proofing, after you've shaped the dough. Now, the good news is that when dough takes longer to ferment or to proof, there's more time for the yeast to create more flavor in the dough. All right, so it's a bit of a trade-off there. Now, another way to approach this is you can mix up the dough and then stick in the evening before you go to bed, put it in the refrigerator, and then let the whole process just, whether you use the instant yeast or the active yeast, you can just stick it in the fridge and it'll slowly do its work over time and develop a little bit more flavor than within just a couple of hours of fermentation at room temperature. Okay. And all of this timing, of course, differs depending on the ambient temperature of the room that you're working in. So in summertime, it could be a faster process. In the wintertime, if your house is cooler, the whole process will slow down. So do keep that in mind, unless you crank up the heat, and then you can speed up that process. Another way to speed this up is to create a proofing box, and I'll take a tangent here and explain that a proofing box is a box that's about as wide as a full sheet pan. The depth of a full sheet pan, the height is probably a couple of meters, and it's got a thermostat, okay, and then and also a setting to control humidity. So you would set this box at maybe 80 degrees Fahrenheit and 75% humidity, and then all your dough goes in there uh, to do its proofing. So regardless of your ambient temperature in your bake shop, the proofing box gives you a consistent location to handle the dough each day. So your overall process in your production kitchen is consistent. Now at home, we can sort of replicate that in the oven, and we can get a pan or a bowl of hot water, put that on the bottom of the oven, and then put our dough inside the oven. The oven itself is off, okay, but the heat and humidity from that hot water is going to uh, come up, and fill up the chamber of the oven. The door is closed, right? And then your dough will benefit from that heat and humidity, and you can speed up that proofing process a little bit. So you might keep that in mind as well. Okay, but anyway, that's the quick difference between active dry yeast and the instant yeast. Instant yeast is no blooming necessary. Goes directly into your dry ingredients. You mix it immediately, and then it works a little bit faster, okay, than your active yeast, which requires some blooming, and then usually translates to a slightly slower fermentation time. Okay, thank you. Next up from Melissa, who writes, "What are some of your favorite spices you like to use in the fall, and what are a couple of ways you like to use them?" Okay, excuse me, just a second. So the spices that I use in the fall are generally the same as I use throughout the rest of the year. Okay. Um, However, ratios can shift a little bit, right? I would choose to use more of these warming spices in the transition to autumn and then throughout the winter uh, months. And, things like ginger and peppercorns and long pepper. Um, there's cloves and let me see here. Well, those are certainly some key warming spices that I'll use, and those will go into anything I make. If I make a smoothie, if I make some savory oatmeal, if I'm making a stir fry of some sort, or if I'm making a simmered dish like a curry of some sort, then all of those might be adjusted up just a little bit in order to bring a little bit more of this warming quality to the body. And sometimes, I guess it must be this sort of seasonal body craving where I feel like adding a little bit more ginger and peppercorns to my banana smoothie in the morning. And I feel a little bit more grounded, a little bit more satisfied when I do that. So that's fundamentally an Ayurvedic approach, right, to the cooking and the way that we will adjust things in the kitchen. Um, and then during the and then I might also use more tahini or sesame oil in preparations and in sauces, right, during the cooler months, because sesame oil is warming to the body. Now in the summer months, I'll start to dial back ginger and the amount of pepper, peppercorn, certainly chilies. I would dial those back in the summertime. And then even the tahini and sesame based products during those warmer months, again, because those are warming or heating to the body. And yeah, I guess I just mentioned some of the ways that I use those as well. They go into anything that I might prepare throughout the day. Thank you. And the next question is again from Melissa, who writes, "What are your favorite menu items for a whole food plant based Thanksgiving?" Um, wow, let me think here. In terms of, let me say first of all, I'll make a lot of the maybe the usual things that I eat. A lot of times it's just in greater abundance because there might be more people at the table. But there's going to be, I guess. Well, okay. Let me just throw out a couple of examples here. There's Brussels sprouts. One way I like to prepare Brussels sprouts is to roast them, get some nice color on them, and then I'll get some kimchi and puree the kimchi, and then lightly toss the Brussels sprouts in that kimchi sauce. And so that's one sort of easy preparation that comes to mind here. There are, I guess I'll get whatever's at the store. I can remember in recent years, things like green beans and preparing those in different ways. And these are going to be, very common sort of American preparation methods. It could be just a simple saute and, with onions or mushrooms or shallots. Sometimes it's with the development of a gravy that might bound all those ingredients to create something that is pretty typical, I think, of the holiday season here. And let's see, you know, I, uh, I sometimes will do some. Uh, this gets, I guess, past Thanksgiving, actually, Melissa, toward the end of the year, where I might do some Japanese sort of New Year's preparations. But um, one thing I try to stay away from are these processed foods, the tofurkey and things that might specifically replicate meat dishes. So these meat analogs don't turn me on as a cook. Um, I don't necessarily need a plant-based sausage or hunk of meat look-alike to make it feel like Thanksgiving in some way that I used to eat it as a younger person. It's just going to be it could be casseroles, it could be root vegetables that are seasoned with the herbs from the garden. Um, so I'm throwing out some very general approaches to my cooking because there isn't I think, a set repertoire that I necessarily go to. I hope that free form approach makes sense. Thank you very much. The next question is from Robert. And it's great to see you, Robert. I recognize you in relation to the wonderful work that you submit. High quality, attention to detail, and always a joy to critique and comment on. Thank you so much. Robert writes, I noticed a lot of restaurants will ask a hopeful cook or chef to make a soup for a working interview, usually whatever's left in storage. Any suggestions which soup, high impact, low risk to make? So, one that comes to mind for me would be a minestrone, or certainly something that is, minestrone inspired. And, minestrone can take the many different guises. And think about a legume that goes in there. If there's anything left over in that walk-in, then grab it. It could be garbanzos, it could be pintos, right? It could be kidney beans. brown lentils. And if there's nothing already cooked up and left over, then look for something like brown lentils, which cook very quickly. And they've got their skin on them so that you can cook them gently and they'll maintain their shape. And I would recommend cooking them separately so that you can control the doneness on those brown lentils in that case as you shift over to the base, right, of the minestrone soup. And you're going to get some root vegetables. You think about mirepoix first. So you've got your onions and celery and carrots, maybe the addition of some potato or really anything else. If the walk-in or the reach-in refrigerator has got some celeriac or turnips or rutabagas or parsnips, you can bring in any of those things. Fennel root works well as well. And then, a tomato product added to the base. It can be in any form. It could be tomato juice, tomato puree, a puree or chop of fresh tomatoes. It could be tomato paste. It can be in any market form. Could be fresh, could be canned, could be frozen. Bring in some tomatoes for its acidity and for its sweetness very often, and then also its overall flavor that it'll bring to the body of that soup. Think about some real basic spices, and certainly black pepper goes very nicely within this mix. Maybe some cumin and coriander, and then try out some herbs, either dried or fresh. Things like thyme and oregano work very nicely. Uh, be cautious with rosemary. If you use it, go very, very easy because it will impart a very strong flavor that will easily create imbalance in the finished soup. Okay. Once that base has simmered and you've got some nice flavor development where you can pick up some of the spice and some of the herbs, and that tomato comes through nicely, and you got some nice texture, then at service, you can bring that together with those lentils or other legumes that you prepared that are just nicely done, maintaining their texture and their visual appeal. Okay, that's a pretty easy approach. Okay, to do something like that. Another suggestion would be a cream of soup, what we call a cream of soup, and you can make very easily a base from bechamel. So you've got milk, you're going to thicken it with a white roux, you're going to season that with some salt and white pepper. Choose white pepper to maintain a nice, clean visual appearance. And then you can bring in whatever is available. It could be, broccoli, it could be mushrooms, and you can cut those into a size that's going to be appropriate for what it is that you're preparing. You can saute those separately to soften them and to get them past that raw state, and then you can then combine them and then finish that simmering process in the bechamel base, bringing all those flavors together, and then do a final flavor or seasoning adjustment, and then always noting the flavor development along the way. Right, a cream of broccoli soup should taste like broccoli. A cream of mushroom soup should taste definitively of mushroom. And another approach to this is to use velouté as a base. So you take a white stock, you're going to thicken that with a blonde roux, and then you can add these items in as I just mentioned, and then you can finish that with some cream to give it some mouthfeel, to lighten up the color, which gives it a very nice appearance in the bowl. And then think about a delicate garnish. And that garnish could be an herb, maybe something that you incorporated in the soup itself in a fresh form. Don't use dry herbs as a garnish. Or you can do perhaps some sort of a crispy component. Maybe it's a crouton, maybe it's a little pinch of fried onion, which would certainly could be justified as a tie-in to the onion in the mirepoix that you used in the soup. But generally speaking, as garnishes, we try to make a connection with the same item that's in that soup already in some fashion. Okay. And so those are three examples for you, Robert. And, hopefully that makes sense to you. Thank you very much. And then the last question is from Marcia, who writes, I'm on the fermentation unit and going to try pickled onions. I also have fennel and radishes waiting to be used. Would those or any other vegetables be a good combination? And so we've got onions and fennel and radishes. Yes, yes, and yes. I think any of those could be done singularly or in combination. And then, things like carrots, work well. And give that a try and, see how you like the results based upon the time, right, that you're letting those vegetables be exposed to the brine. And also the size and shape of the knife cut, right, can make a difference. Clearly if something is sliced thinner with more surface area, then the pickling process takes place faster versus something that is thicker through the midsection, which takes a longer time to penetrate. So you have a great start and have some fun with that process. This is a great place where you can exercise a lot of your personality or your signature touch when you make pickles. So again, enjoy that process. And this brings us to the end of the questions for today's office hours. I hope you got some benefit or some inspiration from today's discussion, and I look forward to seeing you all again. And until we meet, happy cooking. Thank you.